Hello, friends. Patrick McFarlane here of the Liberty Weekly podcast. Welcome back. This one is episode 104, and the show notes may be found at libertyweekly.net/104. I am joined once again by the co-host of the show, Keith Knight. How's it going, buddy?
It's going fine, Patrick.
Excellent. Well, today we're going to be talking a little bit about income inequality. This is kind of a champion term by the progressive left, or the Democratic Socialist wing of the Democratic Party. A lot of talk has been going on lately of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC for short. She's the new iteration of the Bernie Sanders campaign, if you will, although Bernie is still with us, still in the political lexicon. So I thought that, well, Keith and I thought that we would talk a little bit about income inequality, because that is this term that keeps coming up over and over again. It is the reason why everything is falling apart. It's the reason for the financial crisis of 2008. It's the reason for everything bad that's happening in the world. So why don't we tackle it a bit here?
But it isn't. But it is not.
But it isn't
the source of all problems. See, unfortunately, the cause for poor Haitians is not because I'm wealthy. Comparatively, it's not like North Korea is only poor because South Korea took so much of their wealth. Wealth is actually created through capital investment, voluntary exchange, and the ability to trade value for things you're not able to make on your own. So just because something's unequal or appears unequal on its face doesn't address people's values. It doesn't show, well, I value more time with my family than I do working. It doesn't show the amount of goods in exchange for those, let's say, billions of dollars that Walmart has. They'll just say, look at the Waltons, multi-billionaires. What you don't see is the other side of the equation, the millions of clothes, the trillions of tons of food, all the electronics that people gathered because they exchanged their money for those goods and services. So no, just on its face, inequality is not a problem on income. We'll get into the other equalities later. Pat, what are your thoughts on income inequality?
Well, you kind of beg the question of the Waltons, and there's a video that I was watching right as you joined in this conference call that we have here about the Waltons, and maybe we'll get into that a bit later, this Vox video. I've been watching things about AOC and what she's been saying too, and struggling through that. But there's a particular problem that that also always gets called up when you discuss these things. And I guess maybe I wanted to talk about this too with you, Keith, was they always demonize inheritance and people who inherit their money from, the children of the Waltons are really bad because they were just born with a gold spoon in their mouth, and they didn't do anything for it. They didn't work for it, and this is so unfair. This is how these dynasties continue throughout these wealthy families. But another thing I wanted to key into, as long as we're on this topic too, is just this constant thing that they're always picking out, people on the left, is, well, it totally slipped my mind, but maybe it'll come back to me here. So what do you think, Keith?
So about the inheritance claim, first of all, that there's nothing wrong with you working so hard in exchange for your children to have an easier life. Now, that could often backfire. Someone just has a ton of money, they don't gain thick skin, they end up having a harder life. I'm really not sure, but on its face, there's nothing wrong with you working hard to give your family an easier life. This is often the claim we get, that, well, what if someone doesn't have anything? Well, they have family members. Well, what if their family doesn't have anything? Well, see, the first line that they want to take away is family cohesion. Like, of all the things, a parent earning money for their child, they've made that into a bad thing. They've managed to do that. So, yes, if you want to pull up the pictures that I sent you, actually one of the pictures, I think the most recent one says, contrary to popular belief, when you live in a meritocracy, as we do in America, for the most part, the likelihood that you'll keep your inheritance is first of all, very low. And second of all, it right there. So just go back to the previous one.
Okay.
And right there, this is according to a New York Times article. I think it's The Millionaire Next Door, but I have the source there in the image. Most of us have never felt that disadvantage because we did not receive any inheritance. About 80% of us are first generation affluent. That's according to the New York Times. So the image that, well, they just inherit it. That is obviously to get you to think, oh, they're undeserving. Oh, therefore the state can confiscate it at gunpoint. Want to go to the next one or comment on that one?
Yeah, and well, when it comes to generating wealth, it's just that this is one of the biggest drivers of capital investment, because you're thinking of low time preference. You're trying to encourage behavior throughout society of low time preference. That is accumulating capital so that you can be more productive in the future. Well, a lot of these things, these dynasties, take multiple generations to plan. You just don't build America in one generation, or what have you. So cutting away the inheritance or having a very, very high inheritance tax just destroys this incentive. What use do you have? I mean, you might as well just spend everything before you die then, if it will just be confiscated by the state. What is the point in building up any kind of generational business? It's just ridiculous. Peter Schiff has a lot of really good work on this as well. So was going to the next slide?
Yes, but before I start commenting on that, on page 168 of 33 questions about American history you're not supposed to ask, Tom Woods talks about what investment does for the economy. He says, imagine you're investing in a forklift, for example. Firms can now produce many, many times more goods than before at considerably lower cost. This lowers the products of goods and services in every industry. This applies to steel. This applies to all other investments. This lowers the cost of production, thus lowering the cost of the item and increasing access to products and services poor people otherwise wouldn't be able to access. So investment and capital investment is how we all get richer. These 60 companies were in the Fortune 500 in both 1955 and 2016. Again, refuting the myth that once you're rich, you just stay rich, and the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and there's nothing we can do about it. So we need coercive intervention. Now, a couple of the businesses on here I certainly take issue with. Lockheed Martin, and well, I hate Monsanto, but idiots keep buying their stuff. Pfizer is no good, but Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and DuPont, a lot of military industrial complex, places that only exist because Northrop Grumman, those people are real evil. They have a base right here in Chandler. A lot of them exist because the state keeps them afloat and they don't acquire money voluntarily. So if you want to make this a smaller list of the people on top who stay on top, well, then stop advocating us to forcefully fund them. Patrick?
Yeah, I was going to say, some of these companies I do enjoy. 3M, they have a big plant in the Twin Cities, and literally everyone that I've spoken to who works for 3M or knows 3M loves 3M and loves working at 3M. It's really interesting. They make everything, man. They make everything. So yeah, I was going to say, otherwise I was just going to say the same as you. Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, all these things. And that's kind of one thing that and I think this is what I was going to say when I lost my train of thought. But this thing that just keeps coming up is from the left, man. And there it goes again. Why can't I remember this point?
Well, Boeing is also on there, and Boeing is just horrendous. And Lockheed Martin, I'm pretty sure, yes, it was Lockheed Martin that got the U.S. government to spend 1.5 trillion with a T dollars on an F-35. You got to look up that. It's just unbelievable. Once you see that kind of fraud going on, I mean, how is that not, a group of people stole $1.5 trillion for a plane. It's like, are you really worried about what's going to happen in the absence of a state? Really? Are you that worried? Is that going to be able to happen annually?
Well, right. Okay, I finally got it. This kind of plays off of that too, is that I think on the left, and I just watched, God help me, 30 minutes of Ocasio-Cortez in some of her interviews and her ilk. They really do seem, and on the left, they seem to key into this issue that we are having problems with, they're against monopolies, it seems like. One thing that she railed against was the fact that there's only, I don't know, 6 companies in the United States that control all the media, and there's 3 companies that control all the beer that we drink, and yada, 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 just going down the list. And she said, well, we don't have anything going on with antitrust legislation. They're not breaking up monopolies. The biggest problem that we have in New York City and Harlem, what she was saying is that we have all these real estate firms and companies buying up these old apartment buildings and then gentrifying them and then pumping their profits back into the electoral system. So what she's railing on is the idea that private enterprise will get rich, have a lot of profits, and then buy people in the government. And her solution to this is, oh, elect me. Once I get into the government, I'm different than all these other people, and I won't be crooked and corrupt like they are. It's just this secular kind of humanity is inherently bad, so let's have a few people from humanity to rule over everyone else. It just doesn't. I'm glad that I finally got that point, though.
It does take a great deal of humility to hold our position, if I may brag about our position. So AOC, how many beer companies should there be? Do you really know? Do you know how many publishing houses there should be? Like when it's too big or too little? Maybe it's because economies of scale have allowed these people to produce things at such a cost that make it so efficient that that's why everyone can access them. I mean, whatever's behind, the printing of books, I don't know how it happened to where there was we've gone from Gutenberg press to me having 1,000 books in my library. I don't know what happened in between, but I don't know how many production places that there should be. And to think, this is too big, that's too small, to be so confident you're willing to initiate violence to achieve it, that's when you're so arrogant, it's absolutely nuts. Along the lines of monopoly, that is a great myth that the left is against monopoly. They want they want the state to have a monopoly on AR-15s. They want them to monopolize compulsory education. They want them to monopolize the Federal Reserve, money printing and interest rate control, have a monopoly on regulating companies, a monopoly on taxation. So that's actually a myth that they're against. Of course, on the outside, that's what they use to sell to the morons, just like the neocons will say, we're for peace. Well, no, by no stretch are you.
Well, and they, yeah. God, I am just losing it. I'm sorry for this episode. It's been a long day, man. Oh no, because so people will say, and the one thing that really turns them off about voluntarists or libertarians of our persuasion is that, and I've heard this from several people in my personal life, is that we are so arrogant and so holier than thou and mighty on our high horse about morality and everything. But the thing that I say is that, well, I mean, yeah, I can be a little extreme about this, or I don't know, in your face about it at times. I think we all can be. But at the same time, what is more arrogant? Thinking that people should be able to make decisions for themselves without using force or violence, or the people who want to direct everyone else and control everyone else's lives? Whether on the right, it's through morality paternalism, no drugs, no sex, or what have you, that morality. And more often now it's on the left is, you can't mansplain, you can't use Gillette razors and be a freaking misogynist or what have you. So I don't know. I tend to, although we can be kind of morally condescending at times and on our high horse, I don't think it's any worse than the people who would use the violence of the state to force everyone else into their little worldview.
Well, we can go back to our discussion on, Henry Hazlitt or Frederick Bastiat. So she believes that there's a problem. Too few companies control too much of the market share. There are two ways you can achieve your ends of that no longer existing. You can have voluntary boycotts. You can create an alternative. You've got 2.5 million followers on YouTube, or not YouTube, on Twitter, AOC. Rough day for both of us. You can tweet out, hey, here are the good companies, here are the bad companies, let's share this. Sean King finally had a good tweet in his entire life. He said, what we need to do today is stop using banks and start using credit unions. I go, thank God you said something, meaningful. So even when it comes to, things like this on a big scale, companies are too big. There's peaceful ways you can approach this, or there's violent ways you can approach this. And everything you try to curse the big company with is going to trickle down and end up regulating all the other startups. In fact, the big companies can really comply with the regulations, so they often push them a lot, as Anthony Sutton mentions in Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. You have big business constantly pushing for big government as far as communism. Jacob Schiff writing a check for the Bolsheviks. These people pushing the Federal Reserve. It wasn't like big business was like, no, Federal Reserve, and the people were like, yes, Federal Reserve. Of course. Big business always pushes. You have Michael R. Taylor from Monsanto, head of the FDA. You had Hank Paulson, former CEO of Goldman Sachs, head of the Treasury, Secretary of Treasury. So again, you have these monopolies that come into existence as a result of government implementing regulation that competitors can't have the resources to implement.
All right, yeah. So let's take a step back here and kind of frame the issue a little bit more, Keith. I think there's several issues on different levels that we're kind of dealing with. And I think the main issue, one, is, does income inequality exist? Is it worse than it's ever been at any point in time? Because I think that's something that we could contend with. Is income inequality a problem? Is it something that we see in the world? We did kind of address that. The person right now is more wealthy than they've ever been, than any time and point in history. And I think the other thing is this question of, is income inequality bad? Yes, you could say it's unfair that some people have and some people don't, I suppose. But is it bad? Does it cause problems? Did it cause the financial crisis of 2008?
No. Well, you and I are going to do a whole show on the business cycle. But long story short, the reason I don't think it's inherently bad is some people are better than others at tons of different things, whether it's computers, whether it's speed reading, whether it's running, whether it's, doing things around the house. Genius comes in many different forms. One of those ways comes in investments, comes in calling the shots. So the fact that some people have a lot of power is not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's justified that some people have more Twitter followers than others. Some people have more YouTube subscribers. Some people have a louder megaphone in that way. So there's nothing unique about income inequality to where it's like, this inequality is totally different. There needs to be. So this is the example I like to use. The Young Turks have, if you're driving a car, please pull over. The Young Turks have 4.2 million subscribers and 4.5 billion views. If you want to become suicidal, go look at how many views PewDiePie has. Actually, to be fair, I think I'd prefer PewDiePie to get the views, because no one pretends that they're actually getting information from him. It's sort of like watching Family Guy. So yeah, this is a great inequality. Now, do I believe that I have the right to initiate violence against the Young Turk viewers and the Young Turks themselves, to force people to watch me, to make it more equal, to force people to stop watching them, to force them to shut down their operation, 3 days out of the week so I could catch up on my channel? No. This is just another income inequality, or this is just another inequality. But of course, everyone's obsessed with the income one, just so happens to be the one thing that the media is pushing. This is not organic, obviously, it's a tool of the elites, because inequality is pretty much undefinable. So, equality in what? Money earned, equality in assets, equality in amount of time I have on the media, equality in number of books I sell, equality in number of friends I have, equality in number of lovers I have. It's undefinable. So when the state says we're here to achieve equality, they can constantly use justifications again and again to keep implementing new laws. See, still unequal. So it's unachievable and undefinable. So that's why it's a perfect tool for the Obamas, the Cortezes, and the Warrens of the world. Any response to that before I go through the rest of these images?
There was this movie, I think it was a short film that takes this inequality argument to, it's sort of an argument ad absurdum, and I can't remember the name of it. It's the name of this person, but in
Harrison Bergeron.
Harrison Bergeron, where what is it? Some people are too fast, so we have the Olympics, but everyone has weights tied to them because some people are faster than others.
Yeah.
So by implication, you always have to look at what you would be willing to do to achieve this equality that you're looking for. And at the end of the day, if people don't want to cooperate with you, you have to force them to do it in some way, shape, or form. The coercion of the state.
But yeah, I mean, Tom Woods has more kids than I do. That's a big inequality. Not necessarily one that's bad, not necessarily one that justifies me using violence to make it more equal. I'm sure Brad Pitt's had more lovers than I have. Doesn't give me the right to initiate aggression. Walmart has more people working for them than I have working for me. Is it inherently bad? See, they just say, look, inequality, therefore violence is justified and our power is justified. So this, this whole thing is an absolute nightmare. This is a great ebook. Which part are you going at? This is Bernie Sanders is Wrong by Tom Woods.
Yeah, so I have it on the screen here, and we were kind of talking about the ways that everyone is wealthier in this day and age than, say, 100 years ago. So this is one thing that people on the left, or I guess people in the political paradigm in general, like to do, is a false dichotomy, trying to say that thing is either an A or a B or a C, when it's really, the problem is way more complex than that. So just to say that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer just completely ignores the fact that we are progressing through history. And through history, our society and the world as a whole has gotten so much more productive and prosperous and successful. This is chapter 11. Not sure which chapter it is. In Tom Woods' ebook, Bernie Sanders is Wrong, chapter 10. So I thought this was a good place to go. He has a little quote here from Deidre McCloskey. So she says, quote, I estimate that the world income around 1800 was, in modern terms, $3 a day. Imagine trying to live on the cost of a quart or two of milk spread over all your consumption, all your housing, your clothing, your education, everything. $3 a day is a terrible, terrible life. Now, the world average, adjusting for inflation, is now $33 a day. It's about what Brazil is now. $3 a day to $30 a day, even if you include very poor countries like Chad and Bangladesh, is an enormous increase. It's a factor of 10. And in countries like Sweden, the United States, Australia, Hong Kong, the average is over $100 a day. So it's either a factor of 10 for the world per capita, or it's a factor of over 30 for the countries that have fully absorbed the message of bourgeois equality. In other words, a recognition of the value of commercial activity. Here's the most important point right here. The average poor person in the world is better off by a factor of 10 than she was in 1800. And in the countries that have allowed the ill-named capitalism to flourish, like Sweden, which is a highly capitalist country, for all we've heard of its socialism, it's a factor of 30. the equality of real comfort, having a roof over your head, having a serious education, having smallpox vaccination or the elimination of smallpox, having enough food to eat, those comforts which were denied 90% of the people in 1800 are now enjoyed by ordinary folk. Even the poorest in a rich society are vastly better off in material terms than they once were. So this engine has been so much more productive in improving the condition of the poor than any of the schemes of equalization of incomes. So I think that's a nail in the coffin. And here's this infographic that you gave to me as well. It really just kind of points out in the United States, having the median income, you are in the top 1% of the richest people in the world.
Yeah, and that does not give the poor Haitian, as much as I feel bad for them, the Guatemalans, that doesn't give them the right to set up a UN and confiscate property by force from someone earning $32,350. You can look at all the billionaires' money. And if the state were to confiscate all the billionaires' wealth, that would fund the government, I think, for less than a decade. And that's by current numbers. So, of course, when they get more, they're going to spend way more. So even if you were to take all their wealth and redistribute it, you would not get any real gains. Imagine had Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, Ford, the Wright brothers, instead of them investing in things. Now, yes, their foundations were pure evil, but that just proves they had to get the state involved and couldn't get their ideas funded voluntarily for the most part. And they used the state to implement them as far as compulsory education goes and regulation. But had you just taken all their wealth and redistributed it, you would not have any net benefits today. Wealth is not created by violent wealth transfers. This is a perfect image right here. This is the wrong enemy people are focusing on. Even people on the right will say, the Soros, the rich liberals, the hippies. It's not the rich, because you and I are the rich compared to people in, say, I don't know, Puerto Rico or Chad or Sudan or Yemen. The wrong enemy is people who have lots of property, or lots of wealth, or lots of assets. The right enemy is the predators, cronies, and rent seekers. This is the difference between the political entrepreneurs and the market entrepreneurs who acquire goods voluntarily, who meet consumer demand to acquire wealth, and the Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman's, and the Boeings of the world who use coercion to achieve their wealth. Very important image right there.
Yeah. So did you want to cover this one too? How
Yes.
the cost of everything?
Yes. So this is from humanprogress.org. And here we can see that a bike, just think of, we'll just go through a few of these. A bike is a great way to transport yourself, a great way to get exercise. The cost has been reduced over time by a factor of 62%. This is adjusted for inflation and everything, again, according to humanprogress.org, a subsidiary of Cato. So the cost of that has been reduced. Now, that cost was reduced by further investment, making the production of said bikes better, free trade, giving more competition, more choice, lower prices. And the same thing has been applied to the blender, the coffee maker, heating up items, dishwashers. Just think of how long it would take you to wash all your dishes to perfection and get them as clean as a dishwasher does. The refrigerator, the cost of that has been reduced by 52%. So this makes us more equal, if equality is your thing, and it just makes us more wealthier. The cost of a television, that's how you get a lot of your entertainment and a lot of your info. Now, unfortunately, this could be used for bad. In other words, you could flick on CNN or Fox or MSNBC. But in other words, people have the ability to access it much more readily than they previously did as a result of investment, as a result of trade, as a result of private property rights and voluntary exchange, not violent redistribution.
You know what you said about the dishwasher? I don't have to imagine. I don't have a dishwasher. It's awful. It's like the biggest chore of the whole house, actually. Ridiculous. So, I think
So I got yeah, and then this one right here.
this
This
one. Yep.
is
Okay.
the final one. Can you zoom in on this a little, because this is really important. By the way,
Yeah.
I use this in a presentation, and people flipped. So here we have, according to the Dallas Federal Reserve, that's how you know it's accurate. I'm kidding. This is Stephen Moore's book, great economist. So we have all households in 1970 that owned dishwashing machine, clothes dryer, dishwasher, refrigerator, stove, microwave, color TV, VHS, DVD, personal computer, telephone, cell phone, air conditioner. All households in 1970, there was a smaller percentage of all households that had these items compared with the poor in America today in the year 2005. Sorry, not today, compared to 2005. So over a 35-year span, access to goods and services that are vital to our everyday, access increased. Not only that, this doesn't appreciate how much these items have improved in quality. That's very hard to measure. So the quality is increased and the access is increased. This is what you could vaguely call trickle-down economics. In other words, Gordon Gekko is the rich guy in Wall Street, and he's holding a brick up next to his ear. And it's just like, ugh, I would never be seen with that today. Only the rich can afford things when they first come out, but the rich are the ones who end up funding the things when they're really expensive to make and there hasn't been a lot of research and development done. They fund it for a while, and then it becomes more available to masses, assuming it's not regulated the healthcare industry. Now, take the healthcare industry, for example. LASIK and cosmetics have gone down in price rapidly because they are less regulated, whereas other things are more regulated and the price has stayed up for those. So that is my final image and contribution on that one.
Okay, yeah, and I was thinking through. I think we covered pretty much everything except.
Just go back and do that Lou Rockwell quote, because in one sentence, Lou Rockwell just demolishes this. Yes, right here. This one sentence is from the left, the right, and the state. He goes, "No two people have the same scales of values, talents, or ambitions." That to me defeats the whole egalitarianism idea on its face. So just to say inequality exists, that really tells us nothing. That is a great quote by Lou Rockwell.
Right, and likewise, just saying that inequality exists doesn't mean that inequality was the cause of financial calamities, as in, i.e., the financial crisis of 2008. So going through Tom Woods' great ebook, Bernie Sanders is Wrong, which you can get at bernieiswrong.com for free, except maybe your email address. You can see that in Tom Woods' 2009 New York Times bestseller Meltdown, he explains the actual cause of financial crises, which have nothing to do with inequality. Otherwise, we'd be in a constant financial crisis. Okay. So people like Robert Reich think that the financial crisis was caused by rising inequality. Why do those two things follow? That there is inequality, so therefore the entire financial market would collapse. How is there any correlation or causation between those two things? I think maybe there certainly is a correlation. Well, I mean, if you even agree that inequality exists at all, period. But we know that, well, what really does cause financial calamities through the Austrian theory of the business cycle is that the Federal Reserve holds interest rates lower than they otherwise would be. This causes malinvestments in the economy, which inflate credit bubbles, which finally come due when these projects that are working, they've been malinvested. It causes miscalculations in the allocation of resources. And then when everything comes clearing out, when it turns out, oh no, we actually don't have the materials to finish this project, or we can't make the sales to sustain this investment, all these investments end up blowing up and the bubble is deflated and things return. The recession is the cure to reset everything. So that is the real cause of the financial crises in like a very short blurb. Why does it follow that income inequality would cause a financial crisis?
Well, this, of course, is one of the other million things Marx was wrong about. He said basically the monopolies will become more likely, as will oligopolies. More wealth will be consumed and brought to by the capitalists because they just sell, and when they sell, they're making a profit on the exploited labor, and they're gaining surplus value. This surplus value accumulates to a very small elite. Then the peasantry no longer has the ability to purchase those very products, thus a contradiction in capitalism, and that's what causes a bubble to exist and then burst. What it doesn't address is why these sort of recessions happen in one sector, whether it's the .com, whether it's housing. It doesn't address why people don't postpone consumption. It doesn't address why people don't just work elsewhere or purchase items from other distributors. And then, of course, they say, well, it's unequal because if you don't work, you starve. You can't just quit your job. The boss has basically unlimited control over you. Well, they have to explain how 40 million people in America quit their jobs last year. And you're looking at one of them who lost their jobs, how they lost their jobs and didn't starve to death. So just another thing Marx was wrong about. But do we have Vox here to enlighten us?
Yeah, I mean, do we want to tackle the Vox and maybe some AOC quotes just to close up?
Sure.
All right, let's dive into Vox. This clip is about 2 minutes and 35 seconds long. Why don't you, if you want to tackle something, just let me know. I'll pause it and we can talk about it for a little bit.
Got it.
Okay.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal.
Just kidding. Sorry. No, we're not all equal. Inequality, in fact, gets a ton of attention these days. President Obama called it, quote, the defining challenge of our time. But usually when people are talking about inequality, they're talking about income inequality. And income inequality is at its highest level since the Great Depression. Before taxes, the top 1% take home about 22.5% of the national income. Really think about that for a second. For every dollar paid in income in the US, almost a quarter of it goes to the top 1%. A quarter. But income inequality is actually less dangerous than its cousin, wealth inequality. The top 1% hold closer to 40% of the national wealth. So for every dollar in American assets, that's home, stock, savings, all that, 40 cents of it belongs to the top 1%. The top 1% holds more wealth in America than the bottom 90% of the country combined. And a lot of that money gets passed on to their children or their children's children. Take the heirs of Sam Walton, founder of Walmart. None of them founded Walmart. None of them were created equal either. The 6 of them have more than $140 billion in wealth.
Those fucking bastards. How dare they be born into wealth?
Oh yeah, but yeah, and what has Walmart ever done? Besides create jobs and increase our standard of living and help fight inflation by lower costs. So a couple things there. This is the nice equivocation that they do. They change the meaning of equal. Okay, when the founders meant equal, they meant equal in rights that they believed were unalienable, given by God. It was not. We're all born with the same mental capacity. We're born the same distance from schools, from grocery stores, obviously, because that's inachievable. And I love how they quote Obama as if it's like the biggest problem of our time. It's like that is the perfect way the media says, this isn't our opinion. This is someone else's. And then they delegate this authority to an absolute liar who's economically illiterate, who's funded violently, who bragged about how big the Dow Jones increased under his presidency, who was funded primarily by Goldman Sachs, who had Citigroup Bank, according to WikiLeaks, choose his administration. And then, of course, Obama doesn't believe in equality of guns. He wants the state to have a monopoly on those, as well as nukes and taxation and the Fed and compulsory education and everything else. As far as 1% of people getting a lot of one thing, that actually is not a unique aspect to markets or freedom or capitalism. If you look at the NBA, about 1%, just go and ask someone, how many NBA players can you name? There's a lot of them. They could probably name way less than even 1%. That means that 1% create the vast majority of the wealth for the entire NBA. The guys on the bench aren't doing it. What percentage of artists contribute wealth to the music industry? Just go to YouTube. Is there an even distribution of views on videos? No. Equality is something that exists mathematically, not something that exists in nature. We should never expect to see Keith Knight, Brad Pitt, and Cenk Uygur have the same number of views by the same number of people. It's just not how things work. So the reason more people get more stuff is generally because they have found more efficient ways to do things and have done a better job at meeting consumer demand. So they just say, look, this group has more than that group, therefore unjustified. Not the case.
I think it really is brilliant how good they are at this kind of crap. I mean, to anyone who doesn't know any better watching this, you get outraged and you see all these fancy graphs and charts, and then you see the Walton children playing in this pool of cash, and you just get really pissed off. I mean, if you don't know any better, right, you're getting screwed, man. And just the way that they've been able to twist this is unbelievable. And I mean, we've all seen videos like this before and heard these statistics and heard it presented in the same way. But how is there no talk of the Federal Reserve's role in this throughout anyone that talks about it? And I know that Bernie Sanders sponsored the Audit the Fed, but Bernie's not against the Federal Reserve on principle like we are. Where's the talk of money creation happening through the lending process here? I mean, is there any bigger of a driver to this towards the elite than the Fed creating money out of thin air, or banks, for that matter, creating money out of thin air in the lending process, and then injecting that new money to the people who are only wealthy enough to afford these loans or this quantitative easing? And then before they spend the money, when they have the money, the people who have been given the newly created money, the money is worth more because it hasn't circulated through the economy yet. So the inflation doesn't happen until these people who are loaned the money, the newly created money, spend the money at a higher value because the inflation hasn't spread through. And then by the time everyone else gets the money, it's been inflated, prices have gone up as a result, and their dollar goes less far. How is that not brought up at all?
Oh, of course. And basically anyone with a fixed income, say if you're on Social Security, say you're earning minimum wage, and the value of the dollar decreases, it hurts you more than it otherwise would say an investment banker, for example, or someone who owns stock. That of course is a terrific point. The not mentioning the Fed, I really think, is a mixture of ignorance and just no actual desire to find out the truth of anything. Because can you really be said to care about something if you're not willing to do that amount of research? A group of people has a monopoly on printing money, and you're going to talk about wealth inequality and you don't mention them. At some point, it just gets too hard to believe that the Bernies and the AOCs, that no one ever mentions this. Same thing with like the wage gap. It's like, you don't actually believe that, do you? You're just pandering. So yeah, that's where I stand.
All right, let's finish this crap.
Please.
$40 in wealth. That makes those 6 people wealthier than the bottom 40% of Americans combined. Now, there's an upside to income inequality. That income is a reward for people who start their businesses and do great things. You can like income inequality, you can hate it, but at least it is money they earned in this lifetime, usually through talent or risk or hard work with a little bit of luck. But wealth inequality isn't like that. That money is often a reward for people who are just born into the right family. And it's money that keeps growing. That's a big point economist Thomas Piketty makes in his new book, Capital. The rate of the return on capital or wealth is higher than the growth rate of the overall economy. So people who have a lot of wealth, they tend to get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier unless something like a war or a tax intervenes. One way they get wealthier, by the way, is politics. A lot of money can buy you a lot of political speech, particularly now that the Supreme Court is systematically dismantling the limits on buying political speech. This is a doom loop of oligarchy. Wealth buys power, power buys more wealth means more power means more wealth, and on and on and on we go until a very small fraction of the population has a whole lot of the power and a whole lot of money. So no, all men and women aren't born equal. Some are born really, really wealthy.
Okay, that took a turn that I wasn't really expecting it to. It was bad.
Dear Jesus. So if Leonardo DiCaprio comes out with a movie, no one is going to be forced, at least unless you're in Kevin Spacey's basement, no one's going to be forced to go see that movie. What inequality is a bunch of people, in that case, making a decision that he provides them a ton of value in exchange for an hour of entertainment or so. I wish I would get it. I'm not willing to use state violence to achieve it. Another thing, wealth hoarding. It's not under their fricking mattresses. It's in banks being given out to people so they can buy computers, they can start their own business, they could buy a house, they could buy a car, etc. That's just nonsense that they just hoard it. They just have it and they hoard it. Again, they conveniently didn't mention the percentage of first-generation millionaires, as I did, using a source, the New York Times, where 80% are first generation. That would be more if there wasn't a Federal Reserve, if there were fewer regulations, if there were fewer tariffs, which allowed more people to compete with these bigger businesses. They also didn't say another way to fight income inequality. They go, this doesn't happen unless there's a war, which, by the way, well, that's a different subject. Unless there's a war or a tax. Really? That's the false dichotomy you're going to deliver to us? It doesn't come from the Fortune 500 graph I showed you earlier of consumers making different decisions. It doesn't come from employees making different decisions. It doesn't come from people not being able to compete with other competitors. It doesn't come from a change in values. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. And of course, the great inequality of the state controlling compulsory education is what allows this nonsense to go on. Could you imagine? Could you imagine if there was a law? I wish Rand Paul would just put this law up just to show people what they actually advocate. There should be a law, 12 years of compulsory education at Koch brothers school. Everyone should be forced to fund Koch brothers school. And once a year, we're going to take a day off and reflect on the past CEOs of Koch Industries. That last part I stole from Tom Woods, but it's so funny because it's so true. When you just look back at the presidents and just take time to worship each one of them. Inequality is not unique to income, not inherently bad, doesn't justify initiating aggression. If it is a problem, the best ways to curb it are voluntary means and market means, not state violent means.
Yeah, couldn't have said it any better myself. You know, I did go through a bunch of AOC talking points, and that's just what they are talking points. And I think that there's a lot of other people who have really dissected the errors in her statistics. And I think even PolitiFact gave her like a pants on fire liar rating. So PolitiFact must be an establishment website. I mean, even though they tend to skew, I mean, of course they're an establishment website, but even though they tend to skew left, it seems like they're supporting neoliberals. And it is interesting that they're not supporting the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. So I don't know how this bodes. The question remains open. Is AOC and her ilk the future of the Democratic Party? Are they like the Tea Partiers that are just going to have a brief candle and then blow out? Brief Candle, by the way, is a Stargate SG-1 episode for all you cool people out there. It's like episode 2 of season 1. So, Yeah, but I think that's about it. My point is just that AOC uses all these talking points, and everyone throws out wealth inequality without really explaining why wealth inequality is bad, or even backing it up in some kind of way.
She is the perfect balance of stupid and evil. You really have to not want to think about things if you're to say something like, inequality exists, therefore redistribution is justified. You have to, at some point, one of your handlers has to have thought about, if it's justified for this group of people called Americans, how is it not justified for this group of people, poor Americans and Haitians? That's just a total arbitrary boundary. As far as other things AOC has said, she's just such a nightmare. Does she believe everyone should have the right to issue taxes, or does she believe in inequality? Her group, federal government group, gets $4 trillion a year in stolen money. You know how much I get in stolen money every year? Goose egg. Does she really believe in equality? She believes 535 congressmen, a majority of them, most psychopaths, have the right to coercively rule 330 million strangers and a couple million foreigners. Does she really believe in equality, Bernie, Elizabeth Warren? Yeah, they're like the neoconners who say I'm pro-life and then advocate Hiroshima. It's so in your face, bad.
Well, or it was Tom Woods had someone on today who was saying that, you know, conservatives they give lip service to small government, but when it comes down to it, they're not actually for small government. And likewise, the guest whoever it was on was saying that democratic socialists will say that they advocate socialism, and Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would say they advocate socialism, but really when they talk about it, they do talk about nationalizing some industries, but generally they're just progressives who want a social safety net. So it's interesting. But I got to correct myself. Brief Candles episode 9 of season 1 of SG1, Stargate SG1.
You never get to make fun of me liking Dave Matthews ever again.
Actually, there's some Dave Matthews that I do enjoy. I forgot though that Stargate SG1, the first 2 episodes was like a double episode, and then there was a 4th one, but the first like real one is the Broca Divide. So anyways, but why don't we go through some, like, I kind of wanted to, I know that we've been trying to cut the fluff out of the beginning of episodes and get right into the content, because a lot of people, they say their biggest complaint about podcasts are that the intros are way too effing long. So I feel like I do need to talk to the audience a little bit, just do some housekeeping stuff. We haven't really pumped a lot of I did get a big influx of Amazon affiliate orders. So there was about a $25 gift card that came in last week. I've used that to purchase books for the show, because David D. Friedman just came out with a book about competing legal and alternative legal structures. So we'll be getting that and trying to review it, seeing if we can bring him on the show and talk a little bit about his book. Otherwise, sign up for the email list at libertyweekly.net/email. You'll be getting automated updates for every show that comes out. Sometimes I'll write an email out to the audience too, but in case we get totally censored, I know like Luke from We Are Change has been trying to build up his email list just in case that day comes. So if everything goes black, we'll have a CSV list of all the email addresses, so we'll still be able to have a voice. So there's the email list, libertyweekly.net/email. Patreon is great too. We have a lot of great patrons. Thank you to all of our patrons. Always looking for more patrons at patreon.com/libertyweekly. I've toyed with the idea of transferring, and I think that as soon as Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin come out with their alternative platform, I think that I'm going to be switching on that. Other than that, I know that there's been large gaps in the episodes. I'm really, to be completely honest, my first year as a lawyer has been really sapping like everything out of me. So it's been pretty tough just dealing with that. So I apologize for that, trying to get back on track with a more regular release schedule. I think that's just life, man. But other than that, I can't really think of anything else. There's the Amazon affiliate link, libertyweekly.net/Amazon, Patreon email list. So anything else you got, Keith?
Nothing else. I think we've done this thing justice on economic and moral grounds and historical grounds even. So I think we're good.
All right. So be sure to follow Keith Knight. Keith Knight's Don't Tread on Anyone. You got some big interviews coming up, don't you, bud?
You know what? No, unfortunately not.
Okay.
I am looking. I am starting a new job on the 28th, so I will be very busy. But still subscribe because I put out videos every other day. I put out a video. I have 30 videos on deck ready to be published.
Right on. Yeah. I got my first, coincidentally, I have my first jury trial on the 28th. So I've been
Really?
Yeah, that's been my with work and everything. It's just intense when you're doing everything for the first time.
So on the 27th, when neither of us can sleep, we'll just talk like schoolgirls all night.
Yeah.
About our next day.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. There's a chance that it might get pushed back. Oh, sorry, my jury trial's on the 29th. So
okay.
Yeah. But it'll probably get pushed back because the DA is not returning my email messages, and I know that she is double booked for a trial on that day. So it'll get pushed back probably. So maybe I've been trying to do a show where I kind of talk about my experience lately. I don't know how to approach that, but okay. So without further ado, thanks so much for joining us for episode 103. We'll catch you later, guys.